All right, let's get started. I know we're splitting the difference in Berkeley time and actual time. There's pastries and coffee and tea in the back. So welcome everyone, and welcome those online. Give me a thumbs up online if you can hear me. Oh, is it going to there? Okay, thank you. I was like, no. Okay, great. All right, so I'm really pleased to welcome today Anna Middleton. She's come to Berkeley all the way from Cambridge in the UK. And we're lucky to have her. She's our counterpart at our sister center. We're the Kavli Center for Ethics, Science, and the Public here at Berkeley. And Anna runs the Kavli Center for Ethics, Science, and the Public in Cambridge. Anna is also an expert in psychology and public engagement. And she's going to tell us today a little bit about engaging society, about science, and more specifically about a recent deliberative engagement project that she helped run, which is the UKCC jury on human embryo editing. With that, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to read this out so that I don't inadvertently go into a different lecture. I'm going to start with, what's the point of science? And just to humour me on this. Is the ultimate goal of science to push the boundaries of knowledge, or is it to serve society? And who gets to decide this? What happens when scientists aren't actually clear? And if your stock answer is, of course, science exists to serve society, how would you actually know? How are we measuring it? How are we accountable for this? And what happens when pushing knowledge results in pushback from public communities? In this seminar, I'm going to explore how my group at the University of Cambridge considers the relationship between ethics, science, and the public. We combine robust empirical methods drawn from social science, psychology, counselling, public engagement, deliberative democracy, advertising, media, creative storytelling, journalism, and of course, ethics and science. What you're seeing here is the white heat of camera flashes from the world's press surrounding infamous scientist Yu Quay. I took this photo just after he had announced he had edited the DNA of human embryos and twin baby girls had just been born. Here he is walking off the stage. I know this is a case that you will be very familiar with, and today I'm sharing my personal account of the impact of Yu Quay's research. I took this photo from the audience, and I was part of the audible gasp as he walked across the stage. He was here to celebrate what he had already leaked to the press, that he had altered the DNA of human embryos, implanted these in a mother, and edited human beings had been born. I was actually an invited speaker at this summit on genome editing in 2018 in Hong Kong. Here is me. Ironically, I was actually there to present our research on public trust in genomics. And in case you're interested, I was there to talk about the attitudes of 37,000 people from 23 countries, data gathered in 18 languages, and gave an overview of the extensive social sciences and engagement research my group has conducted over the last 20 years. And yet, none of this work seemed to matter, as in an instant, a single scientist who couldn't care less about public trust or societal attitudes had forged ahead with his agenda. He really just wanted to be the first to change the DNA in a human embryo to lead to the birth of a baby. It was as simple as that. He arrived at the conference expecting a Nobel Prize, and he ended up with a prison sentence. And the newly edited children went into hiding. He's now out of prison and working again. And this was 6 years ago, and society was on the back foot. Since then, a flurry of contradictory policies have popped up worldwide. some calling for an outright ban on the editing of human embryos, while others create a pathway to clinical application. However, one common request in all of this policy is a plea for more public engagement on the issue, but no advice on how to do this, what to do with it, or how to know when it is complete. So what's the point of public engagement? Again, just keeping in on this. Is it a performative gesture that makes scientific institutions and scientists just feel better about doing their science? Does it change the way science is done? Does it help public audiences build confidence and trust in science? Policy tells us that it should, but does it? In reality, what's the evidence? What do we need it to do? Endorse science? Give us permission to go ahead? Do you just carry on with science regardless of what society says? Can society stop science? And certainly I've witnessed a fear amongst some scientists that it might. Which public voices matter the most? Do we just keep engaging until we feel we've got some level of consensus of a public view? I would argue that achieving public consensus is a myth and an unobtainable goal. I would also argue that public engagement has historically been a largely performative gesture that really hasn't changed very much. It certainly didn't stop, curtail, or impact Fujian Quay. And I also know that scholarly public engagement has been underfunded and is currently underdeveloped. We want public engagement in academia to be as cutting edge and as valued as the science itself. There is no existing evidence-based method or rubric that tells us when there is sufficient societal engagement to change policy. It's a messy game. And if anyone tells me they've got the answer to gathering global consensus on anything, then they are being promised. So where to begin? Until clear decisions are made at board level of scientific institutions about whether the fundamental point of science is to push knowledge or serve society, and public engagement will continue to be tokenistic. Traditional science engagement is usually delivered by scientists as a lecture or panel discussion, where scientists talk at the public and they are reduced to mere spectators. We also know empirically that this form of public engagement is actually damaging the reputation of science. From the public's perspective, a lecture delivered from within an ivory tower is elitist. The power hierarchy is all wrong. And where do these discussions go? Usually nowhere. Scientists carry on what they're doing. Public audiences, if they turned up, just go home. We also know that science engagement really only meets the needs of public audiences who are walking towards it. These are the publics who are after information, want to increase their skills, have time on their hands, want to learn something new. Our own research has shown that whilst many public audiences might check the box in a survey to say that they are interested in science, or trust or don't trust scientists, when you actually push people, only very small numbers will do something with this, i.e. they convert an attitude into a behaviour. In the UK, we estimate there's only about 20% of the British public who positively walk towards conversation about science, vote with their feet, feel confident, and want to engage. The vast majority are disengaged, i.e. to extend the metaphor, they're standing still, walking in circles, and some are walking in the other direction. We also know from our own research that most people aren't very familiar with scientific concepts. And also, after leaving formal education, most people get their knowledge about science from social media and popular culture. Let's face it, if you want information about science, you can just Google it. Increasing science literacy isn't what we do, as knowledge or lack of knowledge is not in of itself a barrier to conversation. And I know from my own personal experience as a genetic counsellor that genetics patients do not need to know how sequencing is done or the base pairs in DNA in order to make a decision about whether they want a genetic test for pregnancy. We also know that everyone, no matter what their scientific or ethics literacy, can have a conversation and a right to be part of the conversation. And it's not about using deficit models and teaching science, assuming that once people are full up with knowledge, that they'll then be able to make good decisions. It's about creating the conditions for conversation, seeing where it goes, being open to listening and hearing diverse views, and then seeing if this changes perspectives. It's the conditions for a conversation that my group specialises in. What I mean by this is, what is the evidence-based preparation work that needs to be done to help turn someone towards a conversation? Structurally, what can we do to rebalance the hierarchy so that all partners in the engagement, whether they're scientists, ethicists, or publics, are on an equal footing, just people together? We work on moving the signals of elitism literally by moving the engagement conversation out into society. So, imagine you are taking your usual route into town to go shopping, and you see a bus blocking your path, bustling with scientists available to talk about their hopes and fears for the future of AI. Did you hop on? 160 people from Cambridge did just that, and hosted more than 150 one-on-one conversations between AI scientists and diverse members of the public over 2 days. The vast majority of the public said they'd never before spoken to a Cambridge scientist, despite living locally, and were interested to see that scientists look just like them. From the 20 scientists we involved, most said they found using their hopes and fears as a helpful hook into new conversations about AI. They didn't lead with the science, they led with their feelings about it. Public engagement delivery is on a gradient, from light touch to in-depth, tailor-made to the outcomes you want to achieve. And thinking about outcomes, this speaks to my earlier question about what's the point. Do you want to facilitate dialogue, influence policy? If so, which policy? Have fun, address cynicism, or is it merely to check a box for a grant application? The public are not stupid. They want to know what the deal is, who benefits from their involvement, and they expect someone to. Once you step away from the large-scale surveys that only give us high-level messages and actually talk in depth with everyday people, you find that their starting point is often a position of cynicism. If you are not already working in science or ethics and you are not really walking towards science, it is really very natural and only human to doubt, be sceptical, to question, and maybe fear the outputs of science. I want to share a trailer for a new research project we're about to launch called Only Human. And this is based on extensive focus groups that we did across the UK with people who said they were not interested in science. And we asked them, when I say the word genetics and scientist, what is the first thing that comes to mind? And you'll see from this short film that people are naturally cynical. This may be a culturally British thing, or it may be translatable to other contexts. What we're doing with this project is testing to see an overt recognition of cynicism could be a way to break down barriers, thus opening up the conversation. And people watch the film and see themselves in it, and therefore want to talk more. I'm also very interested in seeing how creatives from the media use language and imagery to create a hook to draw people in. And so we explore in this film a creative wrapper to the focus group interviews. Film can take our academic work to a much broader audience, and as I'll show you later, we use this as a method of dissemination of our work.
Please.
For me, it doesn't hold any trust and any value.
I am very skeptical when it comes to, stuff like DNA and genes and that. The pharmaceutical companies, the medicine is a multi-billion-pound business. So why would they want to try and find cures or whatever?
The word scientist just scared me a little bit because I thought, well, it's a scientist, and what are they going to do? They're going to do mutations and
It was on my flight back home from the 2018 conference in Hong Kong, the most extraordinary of my career, that the idea for a citizens' jury in the UK was kindled. The world's first edited babies was causing hysteria and fast clickbait headlines. But what struck me most was the missing voices of people who know the most about genetic disease. I don't mean the scientists. I mean the people who live the reality, who deal with the hospital appointments, taking medication, navigating access to care, understand the injustices baked into the healthcare system, have rehearsed what they feel about passing on their family condition to their children. So much of the societal debate about genetics has been hijacked by discussion of designer babies playing God, media hype about the creation of a superhuman race of enhanced human beings. This has stymied discussion about serious inherited disease that affects centenarians. And who gets to define what serious inherited disease even is? The backdrop in the UK is that it is illegal to edit human embryos that deliberately lead to pregnancy. However, the legislation that makes it illegal, called the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act, is up for revision, and parliamentary discussion unlikely to happen this year after our government election. In anticipation of this legislation review, I can see that after 50+ years of discussion about eugenics, what was missing was the nuanced, thoughtful and in-depth reflection from the people who had the biggest vested interest in germline editing, not because they assumed they would want to use it, but because they also already had a lived experience of thinking through what it might be like to pass on their own inherited condition to their children. When I worked as a genetic counsellor in our National Health Service, NHS, I helped pregnant couples make sense of the randomness of the genetic lottery. We cannot change or alter the genes we pass on to our children, but once pregnant, we can test a baby to see whether it has inherited something significant. The focus on such testing in the NHS is on serious, often life-limiting conditions. It sounds so easy. Have a test in pregnancy, and then you have choices. But if you only happen to create babies that have a disease, then your choice is either to continue pregnancy or have an abortion. I've worked with couples who've made the most painful decision of their lives to end a loved and wanted pregnancy because their baby did indeed have a serious genetic condition. In the UK, it is legal to terminate a pregnancy up to term. if the couple and their physicians agree that the condition is serious, with no legal definition of what serious means. I've also supported families as they've dealt with the heartbreaking post-traumatic stress reactions that are often inevitable. And I've met many families who've decided not to have any more children. I've also worked with multi-generational families who are culturally and socially bound together by their condition, seeing it as part of their identity. For them, termination of pregnancy is inconceivable. One of the proudest moments of my career was being the first person to publish, back in 1998, attitudes of the deaf community towards termination of pregnancy for deafness. My research had shown that for many deaf sign language using families, a generation of inherited deafness, having a deaf child is preferable to a hearing one. This position reminds us that there are no clear-cut answers for a list of conditions that are in and out of the serious bracket. I often think of genetics as the emotional science, as genetic testing can lead to all sorts of feelings: love, loss, connection, disconnection, fear, grief, discrimination. And yet both the science and the policy making is often devoid of feeling. Scientists created this technology, policy makers enabled reproductive choices, and the law determines termination of for serious genetic disease. Yet when it is your family and you are deciding whether to bring a child into the world with or without a genetic condition, the profound impact of this choice becomes evident as a life-altering decision. Given the complex emotions around termination of pregnancy, an alternative approach is to create and test embryos before they're implanted in the mother. This testing has been available in the UK since 1990 and uses the IVF process, including daily injections, egg extraction, fertilization in a lab, testing, selection of embryos free from a specific disease. Sounds easy. But if you only happen to create embryos that have the disease, then legally these have to be destroyed. The success rate is low and the emotional toll is high. What if there was a chance to research how to fix edit or treat the embryo instead? Fast forward 6 years from the 2018 Genome Editing Summit. Human embryo research is a reality at Cambridge University. But legally, this research can only occur up to 14 days of age of the embryo, and then the embryos have to be destroyed. When the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act was debated in Parliament, scientists in the UK will be pushing for an extension to this time deadline, up to 28 days. In the meantime, the first multi-million-pound gene therapies are now available for free on our National Health Service to treat very select, ultra-rare genetic conditions. But because treatments don't target eggs, sperms, or embryos, it's still possible in theory for people who have gene therapies to pass that condition to children. What if, instead of treating a person once their genetic disease has started to affect their body, why not fix the genetic disease in an early embryo so that every cell of the human body has the corrected DNA? Scientists created this technology. Policymakers enable reproductive choices, and the law determines that editing of human embryos to lead to a pregnancy is illegal. The Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act governs the definition of an embryo, the conditions and time restrictions around embryo research. It dictates how pre-implantation genetic testing and termination of pregnancy for serious genetic disease should be offered in the UK. Time is long overdue to bring public audiences into discussion about this act. And so I started to scope out the UK citizens' theory. This is an engagement method, a bit like a legal jury, where citizens are brought together to hear from experts and then make a decision linked to a very specific policy outcome. We partnered with a charity for people with inherited conditions in the UK and invited them to recruit genetics patients for our jury. As you'll see in the film, they look just like everyday people like you and I. Inherited conditions are often not terribly obvious. We connected them into conversation with a diverse mix of experts, from clinicians and Cambridge embryo scientists to policymakers, ethicists, religious scholars, and disability rights advocates. We asked our jury to assume that at some future time point, it could be technically possible to edit the human embryo accurately, in effect allowing the treatment of an embryo with a specific inherited disease, and also enabling all future generations of that family to not have the inherited condition. Is this imagined future something they wanted to discuss with governments when the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act is up for renewal? We supported them, this is really key, we supported them to deliberate, handle opposing views, hear diverse experiences, and translate complex ethical issues into tangible policy recommendations. After leaving Cambridge, we also supported them to create a 50-page policy report containing their views on what parliamentary debate should involve. We also made a film that could be used as a dissemination method. Being mindful that watching a 1-minute trailer could lead to people watching a 10-minute film to a 20-minute film, which in turn could help socialise the report. So I'm going to go show you a film of a distance jury, and what did it feel like to be in the room? Let me show you.
Citizens' juries are often used by governments as a way of getting public opinion that's in depth, and they tend to be on controversial ethical issues. So they've been done recently on abortion debates and gay marriage, and there's been loads of citizens' juries on climate change and also on Brexit. So they tend to be on controversial issues, and they help policymakers guide what they do.
Currently, we are asking you to explore whether there are any circumstances under which a UK government should consider changing the law to allow intentional genome editing of human embryos for serious genetic conditions.
What we're trying to do is get into the detail of what the decisions should be, what should guide the decisions to make a big change for the government to actually allow germline genome editing. What are the factors that people with lived experience think are relevant factors? The beauty of a citizens' jury gives that ability to get a mixture of people together with different perspectives, different backgrounds, to discuss the theme in depth.
Lived experience is really hard to capture unless you get people together to really talk about their experiences.
Today, day one, you'll get a chance to actually talk to the people who are coming to do the presentations as well, ask some questions, dig into a bit more, and start to develop a map of the issues that you want to turn into recommendations, the things you want to focus on.
So sometimes those glitches or the changes in the DNA happen in the egg and the sperm, and that's what gets passed on to us. And that's when we really describe conditions being heritable. Often it feels that that conversation isn't accessible to the layperson or to people in society, because just the language around the conversation and the difficulty around the conversation is so complex. So that's why I think citizens' juries are really important, to bring that voice in.
Before 2012, genome editing technology was really limited. And in the past few years, though, it has accelerated rapidly, and it's why it's such a crucial issue for this jury and for wider public discussion.
So there's been a lot of technological breakthroughs recently in field genetics, things like CRISPR-Cas9, even new things like base editors. These have a lot of power to be able to, potentially treat and cure genetic diseases, but they can also reinforce a lot of existing societal biases. So in this way, I think public need to be very aware of how this technology could be used for benefit, but also ways in which it should be constrained for if it was to cause further problems. And politicians as well need to be very mindful of how this could be used by good actors and potentially bad actors.
Having been able to talk directly with the experts, particularly the CRISPR experts, testing my knowledge and understanding of what's what has been incredibly valuable experience. I've learned more in 2 days, I think, than I've known in the last couple of years.
The law can say one thing, but the policies that are executed can mean that it's really something quite different.
If I want 3 children, how do I choose which child definitely does not carry my gene?
Germline gene editing makes that individual, that they don't have the option of passing on a non-edited version of their genome.
I would have thought that there would be some people in the room that would see the technology as having a potential benefit for a very few people, and that would want to see it being allowed to have some form of clinical trial. But I do think that there is a likelihood that people will also have completely the opposite and will say, given the limited resources we have in this country, we don't think that we should be even considering this until we've actually fixed the system. So I think there will be absolutely diametrically opposed views in that room.
How much of these editing that is going on will not end up eliminating some of the benefit?
How do we know that these genetic changes that cause a short-term problem in a person's lifetime don't have an eventual positive change for the human race overall?
Here we need some balanced evidence, positive evidence for living with genetic conditions, and then we've got lots of concerns about eugenics, concerns about the ethics of research, human rights and hierarchies of conditions. I think all of these are kind of connected issues.
I don't think that's a consideration, because you form your identity after birth.
How much do we actually need to consider the global context in the decision that we're making?
We're never going to be able to prevent this travelling idea, so actually that argument, it's not a great one, because other countries probably will go further, so people will always travel.
If we have strong, robust and fair legislation that allows this within the NHS, that's our best attempt at equity in this country.
I feel being part of the process is a privilege. It feels both onerous and liberating. It's heavy, it's exhausting, it's challenging, but it's empowering as well.
There are really quite diverse and divergent opinions here on the question at hand, but people have been able to hear it, and some people have found it very challenging, but I think that they've found the space one that has allowed them to express it and talk about how emotional it is for them.
Your facilitators, I believe, have a little single dot for you. We're going to ask you to come and drop your sticky dot into here, and we will have a final vote.
We're encouraged by the fact that we haven't all got to agree with everything. I think that's part of the process that's come out, that there are going to be nuances in how people feel about it.
So for me specifically, with the inherited disease that I have, it would be very beneficial for the laws to be changed.
Can you read that to that?
I feel I've really been part of the sort of decision-making process, the conversation, rather than just listening into evidence, which obviously shapes my viewpoints now.
I came in with the perception that this isn't something that we are ready for as a society. And then after listening to people, I felt like we need to be having this debate, learning people's experience. It felt like this will make real impact on people's lives. And then today, I felt like, no, still the issue of trust that I had in society and in policymakers and politicians in ensuring that this will be something that is equitable, patient-centered. I feel like that trust is still not there.
I might not live an incredibly long life, Sorry.
It's okay.
And I believe in choice. However, does any severe morbidity in me and the length of my life determine its value and its richness? No.
I know something will happen. Something will happen at some point. But for some of the people in this room, it's not going to happen in time for themselves or their children. And that is quite sad. But it's not about us. It's actually about society at large. So we have to put that to one side and consider it seriously. And it's been really fascinating to be a part of that, to see it happen.
The jurors have done an incredible job. It became really obvious that it isn't a simple question to answer. So what they've done throughout the week is to bring the nuance and the depth and the reflection that only a personal lived experience of genetic disease can bring. And so in that sense, they've done an incredible job at coming to any consensus and decision.
We don't know when this is going to become a hot topic, but we are anticipating that it will at some point, and that will be the moment where policymakers will seek out public and patient voices. I would like you to step out of this room with your hearts on fire and be really proud of what you've achieved. As far as we know, this is the only citizens' jury on embryo editing that has involved patients and families in the UK. So you can say that you were here at the beginning.
So when the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act is debated by the government and parliamentarians Google human embryo editing because they won't know anything about this. We want our film to be one of the hits. We've shared the report that the jurors wrote and the film with policymakers from the World Health Organization and the Department of Health and Social Care folks were involved in writing and revising the Act, and also the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority who regulates who to practice the Act. We pushed it into public and finally it's called. And the film has been picked up and recognised at 7 international film festivals so far. So the jury's findings have already been discussed in national media and radio. So whilst we've made some interesting inroads in gathering nuanced and thoughtful views and shown that we can create the right conditions for respectful debate that can lead to policy recommendations, I'm actually not offering this as an endpoint or a full solution. No single study has ever been used as the answer to public views, and like with science, it needs to be replicated, tested, and examined from multiple angles to see how it stands up. What we showed with our Citizens Jury project is that 4 days of thoughtful deliberation with people who have lived experience of inherited disease wanted to open up discussion with government now about legalising the clinical use of embryo editing. The process was robust, but of course it is entirely feasible that a different audience may form the complete opposite view. And this is why the job of policymakers is so incredibly hard. And what they need to do is balance the societal research from many different sources, including a multitude of quantitative and qualitative methods for evaluation. And what we collectively need to do next is build the evidence base for creating the right conditions for diverse audiences, for scientists, ethicists and publics to connect, as well as a way to collate and evolve this evidence base. And this needs to be done globally. So coming right back to the beginning, what's the point of science? Well, I'd argue that the point of science is to serve society, and we need much better ways of figuring out how to deliver this partnership. And genuine partnerships require authenticity, transparency, a shared set of values, the right conditions for sustained conversation, the ability to challenge and be challenged, and this last point is very important, safeguarding, so that all parties are able to weather difficulties together. But just like society more broadly, it often feels that such a partnership is an unrealistic utopia, particularly when we throw in commercial interest, power, narcissism, politics, and self-interest. However, if we really do want science to be of service to society, and we believe that public engagement should be more than a tokenistic gesture, then I'd say it's worth a go at building the most robust evidence base to deliver it. Scientists create this technology, policymakers enable choices, and the law determines the parameters that society lives within. And we can all vote with our feet, look towards, walk in circles, or walk in the direction, and the choice is with us. And I'd like to finish with one final film, which shows the premiere of the Citizens' Jury film at our local cinema and discussion with our local Member of Parliament. We've initiated conversations that continue to this day. Our Citizens' Jury have now left the fold, have developed their own identity and mission, and when the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act is debated in Parliament, they are ready and prepared to contribute. Here's our final film.
Do you imagine, in your lifetime, that science will lead to treatments and cures for inherited disease? Do you believe that there are limits to the way genetic technology should be used? And who gets to decide this? I'm Anna Middleton. I work in Wellcome Connecting Science, and I'm also a research director at the university. I'm about to show you a film on our work to deliver the UK's first Citizens' Jury on human embryo editing. The jurors, or citizens, are the stars of our film and are present in the audience today. We're going to open up the discussion and imagine together whether we want science to lead to treatments and cures for inherited disease, and whether we feel there are limits to the way genetic technology should be used.
When this comes before Parliament, if it comes before Parliament, I would hope and expect what you have brought through your lived experience and through the deliberations that you've had would help to inform that kind of discussion.
I want to go to the House of Lords. I want them to go to the Commons. What I've learned is that I'm not alone.
Don't ever be dispirited. Change is always possible.
We promised the jurors that we would continue to work with and alongside them, ensuring the conversation would get bigger, wider and more inclusive. Human genome editing is already a scientific reality. What we do with it is still very much up to us.
Thank you for being here.
There we go, thank you.
We have time for some questions. Jay, would you like to go with that?
Yeah, I know this was really fantastic and fascinating. The citizen jury just looked like an extraordinary discussion, and extremely well managed. I guess my question is really just about the role of the films in the process that you're describing. I think at the beginning you mentioned that advertising was one of the things that you were drawing on, and it did seem like there were the films were beautifully produced in some ways, but they were highly edited. They were, they had the polished twinkly piano music that was really tugging at the heartstrings, and it was very effective and led one to be more interested in what was going on. But it didn't give one much of a sense of the quality of the discussions in the jury itself, which I think would be probably the most important thing. So I'm just curious as to what role do you see the films playing in relation to the juries themselves? Is it just a way of kind of making people curious to find out more about what was going on, so that they take the discussion seriously?
The films are very specific and very deliberate as a conduit to the mechanism to dissemination. So we know who's going to read a 50-page report unless they're really interested in the subject and they're in depth in the subject. But the 1-minute trailer for this film can be disseminated, and that's one of the things we're very interested in, is how shareable, how do we make things that are shareable? Because if it's shareable, it's about starting a conversation. That's what we want to do, is to start a conversation. And as far as working with the creatives, they are experts in speaking to wider audiences. So how can we use some of the skills that they can sell a shampoo to 60 million people.
Yeah.
Dove shampoo in the UK has got 60 million hits on YouTube. A pointless shampoo.
Yeah.
Can we use some of the magic that they use, the core sort of exchange of human vulnerability, which is the core of that? How can we translate that into something meaningful like this? Very interested in that translation. And in terms of the polish, well, I can tell you the piano was actually one of our PAs, who's a pianist. So it didn't cost us anything. We actually did the piano, and it also makes it actually didn't cost us anything. But it's a way into the conversation. That's all. Oh, but you want to know more about the integrity of the actual discussion. That's what you're...
Well, I do think to really learn from the juries, that's what, of course, we're, affiliates of the Kavli Center in Berkeley. And so this is the natural audience that would presumably be interested in the substance of the discussions and learning more about how it went. I'm not sure that policymakers or politicians will have that same degree of interest, but I think that's where, that seems like that's where the rubber really hits the road.
Yeah, so this kind of deliberation is not just an open, nice, friendly chat. And if you bring together diverse audiences, chat can go all sorts of directions. It's very, very policy focused. It takes a lot of skill of the facilitators to keep bringing it back to the policy question that you meant to answer. And it did take 4 days to actually steer everybody to that endpoint. It's kind of a skin involved in that. And as you can imagine, if you're dealing with our public audience here, some of them have genetic conditions themselves. Some of them have children that have died of genetic conditions, and others are just carriers of genetic conditions. So there's a lot of emotion in the room. And people were putting themselves into a bit of a hierarchy of whose feelings were more important. And we involved 2 counsellors over 4 days to help with the emotion that was in the room. And I think that safeguarding is absolutely key to this kind of work.
And then is that okay? So this is like a hard one, because we adore the citizen jury concept that you have developed. And I think that the process does allow a lot more thinking than we saw in the films, and we want to model it for us. We super admire you and your work. I have to be honest, because my whole career is sort of getting something that happened here today, which has to do with the tinkling music and stuff. So, I'm a specialist on how emotions drive cognition and decision making. And I think that I was very affected when I'd seen the film, I read the articles, I didn't quite see how the vote was so balanced with extending the law. So there is a lot going on here with taking people who are genetically affected and then advocating for them to be involved with legislation, as opposed to the whole interest of the general public, which of course I know you well know needs to be balanced, because the stuff that we've written a bunch of articles about the risks from germline gene editing, so that we don't feel from a human rights perspective that the world's ready for it. I'm biased because I've done a bunch of writing and thinking about the risks of the whole world. And especially, one of the beautiful things is that we came out with the idea that it would be covered by the NHS, which in the US will be rich people, not poor people. We'll have totally different equity issues. So it makes me think about the challenge. I mean, this is still probably the best method we've seen in public engagement. We need public engagement. But if you do it to genomically affect the audience and then present it massively with all kinds of bells and whistles to the public, what happens to the balance in the legislative process of the public's interest?
So we have a very specific context in the UK that's perhaps different.
Okay, it's got to be.
Yeah, so if this was ever legalised, it would only be within the context of the National Health Service and the regulation of the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. And that organisation only gives specific licences for specific conditions. So in the UK, on the NHS, we're never going to get into the design of a territory because we're only allowed to deal with serious inherited conditions. And of course, there's no,
So in genetic systemic research, we've written a lot about societal things on the conscious movement.
Well, you're always going to have a commercial interest, right? You're always going to have a companies that are going to do it. People are always going to travel.
In the UK, that's not legal.
In the UK, if you just get a license to offer it, it would be under this regulatory authority.
So you couldn't privately pay for it in the UK.
Well, of course, you could buy anything,
But not in the
not
UK.
through the NHS. No, you could not buy the things that we're worried about in terms of eugenics.
Like a different world.
I would still really challenge that because the HFEA, so the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, that's been offering licenses for pre-implantation genetic testing over the last 20 odd years, they have started to open the definition of serious under that authority. So there's a different state argument has started because they've made the argument to involve offering testing to couples that maybe aren't directly affected themselves but are related to somebody who might be affected. So it's slightly different from this is from my line of the family. I really understand this condition. Thank you. Yeah. Any questions? Can I just say something about the vested interest? So we were very, very specific in this jury because of the UK context to ask genetics patients.
We wanted the experience.
Yeah, because we needed. So other juries should of course ask public, wider public.
And both of those might influence this particular legislative decision. That's what I thought.
Yeah, and people will vote, they'll vote for it, and parliamentarians and members of the public, they're gonna when they work with the broader public.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So the gentleman has hand up for a little bit. Go ahead. I'll do my best to see. I think a bunch came up all at the same time, but okay. Adriana and then Barbara.
Yeah, thank you for the great talk and your fascinating work. My question is somewhat related to what Jay and Jody just voiced and articulated in a way. So I was wondering how you think about the social epistemological basis of engaging people who are themselves directly affected, right? I mean, one thing you mentioned is that the emotions were high in the room, right? And from this, like, you could perhaps construct an argument that, well, if you were to engage people that are not themselves directly affected, maybe they could view the matter with somewhat greater distance, right? Whether this is good or bad would be, then a matter for debate. But it seems like, not saying that this is a good analogy, but suppose, we were debating how to regulate whatever robberies and the risk thereof. Bad analogy, but please forgive me. If we were to only engage, in terms of a jury on this matter, or sort of a citizen deliberative body, people who were victimized by this phenomenon, maybe that wouldn't be the best way to go.
Can I just pick up on something?
Sure.
So if we were to only engage
a
particular group, then that wouldn't be good. Absolutely, fully agree. This is one out of 50 studies we've done. So what you want to be doing is thinking about the diversity of the public out there, those with vested interest, those without vested interest, the diversity of the broader public. I'm talking about those who are walking towards, only 20% of the public are actually interested or really care about any of this. 80% really couldn't care less. And so the other, a large part of the work that we do is, what's the hook? What's the hook to even help them walk towards you to start a conversation? What's the shareability of the conversation? How do you help one person tell somebody else in their family? We have this principle that pub rules apply. If you can have a conversation in the pub about this stuff, then you succeed. And so that's why we're very interested in working with advertisers and creators and filmmakers, is what hooks are they using? And when I showed the bus events, the hook there was hopes and fears. So it wasn't coming and have an in-depth conversation about AI. The public audience will walk in the other direction. If they see that, it would need to Cambridge scientists at my time. But if it's what are your hopes and fears, what's your imagined future? That's the hook, that's the way in, and then can you build on that? So this is what I mean about public engagement in the gradient. You have the hook, you have the vertical beats, one end, and then you have the in-depth, reflective, nuanced engagements at the other end. And you have to consider it. More to
All right, so technically it is now time to move into our more focused conversation, more informally with some snacks. But I will take one last question since there were a bunch of people that came up. Are either of you staying for the next part? Yeah.
Well, actually, Stuart and Katie were waiting as well as Brian.
I'm wondering if they're staying, because we could say, if there's somebody that's not staying that wants to get that last question, and I'm gonna prioritize.
Okay, I'm not staying, but I think the question has been asked. I was kind of gonna like ask it the other way. Like, I could see most of us getting involved in a debate about closing public universities, but how do you get people who don't have a vested interest, right, for which this is really, you know, well, what kind of society would we like? As you say, most people are not going to take 4 days out of their lives and participate actively in that discussion.
So the public audience that you want to engage with, where are they? And go meet them where they're at.
The bus.
Simple as that.
On the bus,
Yeah.
in the pub. Okay.
Okay, well, let's thank Anna again. Thank you, Innovative Genomics Institute, for co-hosting this with us. And I hope you all will come again. And with that, I will unveil the snacks and we'll just turn these up inward and we'll sit around and have some more conversation. So you're all welcome to stay, whether you sign up or not.